Oh, we were frozen there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? Okay.
It's working now.
Okay. Look, we hope so. Sometimes we come there that scramble. But anyway, good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday.
Hello.
April 26th, April 25th, 26th.
26.
April 26th. Yes, draft day. That's why we're wearing. You can't see your shirt, but that's you'll see my Orioles and Ravens shirt because today is draft day. This is the Baltimore. It's the menacing bird. No little weak soft birds, but the home of the birds. The weak birds. Well, the Orioles are playing like weak birds right now, but these are nice strong birds. You see the menacing look of the Raven and also the Baltimore Oriole. Hope the Ravens get a playmaker in tonight's draft.
That's all it is a look.
What are you talking about?
Because
we always talk bad about the Orioles. But anyway.
Did you turn that just now?
I don't know what I did. Did I mess it up?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Well, anyway, good evening. It's Thursday. Let's see. I gave you the date already.
Mm-hmm.
We are your parent and your family mentors and marriage and family mentors. Tonight we're talking about parenting from our book, The Parenting Book. We've been talking about parenting all month. And as you know, we like to discuss the how-tos of acquired information.
Yes.
Because as we like to say, there's no shortage of information out there. I mean, you can get it everywhere, especially in today's age of social media, but really with the proliferation of the internet, we've always had access to a lot of information. But the problem is we don't know what to do with that information once we get it. And even with that being said, a lot of people still don't have the information either. But we talk about the how-tos, and when it comes to parenting, which was really the catalyst for a lot of our other books. We had people asking us a while ago to write parenting books, but they were so delighted with the way our children behaved and how they conducted themselves in various settings. And we would always say that we wanted to make sure that they were able to live on their own and once they reach their age of majority and do things outside of our purview and have some success in those the various areas of the life. Oh, you taking my water, moving it over there?
Yeah, that was dangerous.
Okay, no Navy mishaps.
Right.
And so we waited. We waited until we had some marked success in this area before we decided to write books about it, and then even talk about it. So that's what we did. And last week we talked about a subject that really near and dear to both of us. It was that we talked about on partnering with others to raise your children. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't watched that video, we really encourage you to go back and watch that because a little African proverb, or I guess it's a proverb, a saying proverb, but it takes a village to raise a child, and nobody should do it alone. Or if you're doing it alone, you really shouldn't try to do so. And we give you some practical tips there to help you bring others in to get the best out of your children.
Right. And so tonight, what we want to talk about is teaching children their identity. And when you think about the whole issue of identity, I mean, a lot of times we don't know who we are. And we're going to just take some time to kind of look at what that means and how it is that you and your children can both explore and discover your identities. And it'll really help to unfold for you as you're working to do that with your children. But this is a part of our book.
Now, I'm really
done my series.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear you say that, because even as we discussed this topic, we had a little, what Nicole and I do, we say, okay, as we discuss these various topics and we try to fit it into this 30-minute time frame that we've allotted to ourselves, we picked some of the things that are really important to us. And as we talked about the things that we wanted to bring up regarding the children, we said, wow, these are issues where a lot of adults struggle as well. So I'm glad to hear you mention that, because that's very true.
What?
About how the issue of identity, how it can be applicable to the children and the adults, and how it's tough for the adults to lead their children in this way when they struggle with their identities themselves, even at 25, 35, 45, 55.
Well, I mean, but think about it. We're really just big kids. And if we didn't get the kind of guidance and direction that we needed as we were growing up, then we continue to grow and learn and develop right along with our children.
Yes.
If we allow ourselves to. And I think that was a journey. That's why I love being a parent. I tell my kids all the time, I love being your mom. Like, I love this journey because I am growing and learning and developing right along with the children.
Yeah, where parenting always gives you an opportunity to do something that you've never done before, because quite frankly, you've never been there. Even as your children get older, you've never had that experience before.
And don't we say that? We've never been here before. We don't know this. We're going through it together.
Yeah. So it's very fun.
Yes.
But tonight we're talking from the subject, as I said, teaching your children their identity and the Parenting Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It book. That's our book that Nicole and I co-authored. We wrote it as a 31-day devotional. It's 31 and it's a 31-day practical guide with practical, effective parenting tips to win the battle for your children. And in this book, the way we set it up, and like I said, this is day 10. We set it up. Every day has a base scripture to really guide you, and then we give you some practical knowledge things you can read, like a traditional devotional that you can read and digest that information and give you some guidance on how to approach that subject. And then we give you a prayer.
Right.
That we tell you to pray initially as a prayer petition, then out throughout the day pray as a prayer of thanksgiving. Then of course, for some of you may do a little mixing there. You may do the prayer, a petition, and thanksgiving simultaneously, because quite frankly, you might be at a stage of your life where you pray, and sometimes it may be a little hard to distinguish between the two. Right. But the scripture for teach your children their identity in Christ is Ephesians 4:1, which is really one of my favorite scriptures, not only for your children, but even for the adults themselves. And it's walk worthy of the calling for which you are called. And I think that's extremely important, because once you understand who you are and where you're, I'm sorry, would you say that?
I said yes.
Okay. Once you understand who you are and where you're going, that's what's going to set up the discipline and parameters of your life. It's going to determine what you do and why you do it. And it's also going to determine what you don't do and why you don't do it. And that'll help give you the parameters and the structure that really have effective days. I think a lot of us say, well, how you doing today? And it's Monday. You just automatically assume that it's going to be a bad day because it's Monday, or whatever the case may be. But when you're walking worthy of the calling for which you've been called, you understand that this is the day that the Lord has made. You're going to rejoice, be glad in it, because he's already made the day. Whole nother topic. But nevertheless, it's going to really guide you and let you know that every day can be successful, because he's preordained my steps to do certain things in this day. But I got to understand what that is in order for me to do that. And that's why you got to walk worthy of the calling for which you've been called. I know we'll probably talk about this a little more later. But like I said, it tells you what to do, what not to do, what to avoid, what to make sure that you participate in. And really, there's no bright line test for this, because especially if you have more than one child, what's right for one child may be totally inappropriate for another child, because they're calling, and it's not it's not a group calling. It's everyone has an individual calling.
Well, what you mean inappropriate? Why you use the word inappropriate?
Well, because what's good for one child may not be good for the other child. So to try to force, or even what's good for you may not necessarily be good for your child. So to force them in a particular direction that's not good for them, the adjective I use to describe that is inappropriate. Because it's not right. It's not right. You're forcing them in the wrong direction. Or I think, as Stephen Covey said, your ladder is leaning against the wrong wall as you're trying to climb up the ladder of success. And one of those books that he wrote. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, okay. Now, this is really important to us, this whole topic about identity and discovering your children's identity, and to help them discover their identity. And when we were raising Jay and Josh, because we don't consider ourselves raising them at this point, because there are stages of parenting, and we won't go into that. But when we were raising them, we gave them a rite of passage. They both had their own rite of passage.
At 13.
And the purpose of that was to bring together, because we talked about it last week, that you need a team. That, we talked about the village, but you need a team, different people that can speak into your children, because you're not always going to be the one that can get through to them. Because we said the definition of an expert is what?
Somebody else.
And
we don't know that's even true with us as well. I mean, we know sometimes someone can tell you one thing, then somebody else can come out and say the same exact thing, and you act like this fresh manna from heaven and like this tremendous revelation. So, and all it was somebody else giving you something that you've heard many times before.
Well, but they may have said it differently, and you got to give place to that.
Sometimes only different thing was the voice and the vessel.
Well, and that's what you think, because their words, just the timing, how they said it, whatever the person was going through at that moment, it was able to get through and get in. And we just have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with that.
Okay, go ahead.
I guess you're not. Okay. So, and it's the same with your children. If someone else is the one that can get through, you need to encourage that and support that. And so we did that with the rite of passage ceremonies for them. We brought together people in our lives that can speak into them. We are Christians. All of our material is Christian based. We use the Bible as our book that guides us in everything that we do. And so all of the people that we brought together were those that were strong in faith, believed in the word of God, followed the same Jesus that we follow. And so we had prophetic words spoken over them, prayers that were spoken over them. They all came together, laid their hands on them and encouraged them and to help them understand who they were. Because what we know, and Tony, you can speak to this better than I can, is a Black man in America is hard. And so a lot of young men, first of all, they don't grow up with their fathers. And thankfully, their dad was not only in their lives, but very active in their lives. But then to know who you are from a Christian perspective in Christ, that's another level. And so that's what the rite of passage ceremony did. It was an affirming time, and it also was a declaration of who they were. So that was going to help them really in how they made decisions, how they were choosing their friends, what they were getting involved in, because they
how
knew
they spent their time too.
Right. They knew at a young age that you are special, and we wanted them to feel that way.
Absolutely. So, and when it comes to like really helping your children with their identity, you know, say, well, okay, that's a very broad topic, and it sounds almost kind of abstract, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what do? You know, some of these how-tos, and first and foremost, you have to study your children. You have to look at this aspect of their life, even from the time they come out of the womb. Is, you know, of course, out of the womb, they're not doing too much other than pooping and sleeping. But as soon as they start doing things, you need to start looking at them. You need to look at what they enjoy doing, and don't overlook that. Don't make that a cursory thing. Like really understand that and really investigate it. What do they dream? What do they talk about the most? And don't just look at their conversations as just little insignificant, irrelevant, mundane conversations. But what they're doing is they're expressing what's on their heart right now, and they're letting you know what they're interested in. What do they talk about the most? What are they curious about? I mean, because one of the things that we did with both of our children, and they had different paths. I mean, they have a lot of similarities, but they had a lot of differences. In our oldest son's life, you know, he was really into the robots, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and if there was something to be built and that he can put together, he was interested in it and had you going around looking for all kind of stuff. And that's what he was into. I mean, stuff like music. He was into the beating of the drums and all that other kind of stuff. Whereas our youngest son, he was interested in music as well. But I mean, this dude, he was almost like Michael Jackson. He just ready to dance at any time he heard a beat. But he was also into movie scripts. I mean, he would watch a movie, then he would present it to us and say things like, I know you watched this movie right there, but see this line right there? It wasn't supposed to go like that, because he would go and find the script of the movie and say, this is how the line was supposed to go. This is how they were supposed to act in that situation. So we realized that they had proclivities in certain areas, and we watched them and we tried to make sure that based on what we saw, we exposed them to those proclivities so that they can advance and that they can grow, because that's what they were interested in, and we couldn't force our way on them. I mean, I can tell you, I'm sitting up here even tonight wearing a half Baltimore Oriole baseball shirt. I am a huge Baltimore Oriole fan. I grew up loving baseball, still love baseball to this day. And I would love for my kids to love baseball, but I can tell you right now that neither one of my kids like baseball. And one iota, they can give a rip about the Orioles or any other Major League Baseball team. And I couldn't force that on them. They didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't like it. So you got to look at what they're interested in and help them in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And it goes even a step further, because as you're studying your children and, you know, they're in school and you're watching, you know, who it seems that they're interested in playing with, how they're feeling about themselves as it relates to gender, as it relates to beauty, creativity. We were talking about Jay and Josh being into those things, but remember, there was a time where Jay, because he was really into cartoons and he didn't know that other kids were really into cartoons, he kind of hid that because he didn't want anybody to think that, you know, as somebody
as he was becoming a teenager.
Yeah,
right?
in middle school and stuff, that in high school, that, you know, I still like cartoons. And we wanted him to know it's okay if that's what you're into, because you may be going into becoming a graphic designer, or you
Pixar,
might,
as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, I mean, that's how we came up with his initial college list. We looked at Brown, Penn, and schools like that. And it wasn't because they were necessarily Ivy League schools.
Mm-hmm.
They initially popped up on the list because we did the research and saw that that's where Pixar and DreamWorks recruited from. They recruited from those schools. So those are the schools we're just targeting. And for those of you who know, he ultimately ended up going to Brown University.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how the list was initially formed, because it's like, okay, if I'm interested in this kind of stuff and I have this desire to build things, but I also like cartoons and Pixar and DreamWorks of these companies, and I can go those routes. And then of course I have this danger side to me. So the Naval Academy was also on the list as well, looking at conceivably flying fighter jets and all that kind of good stuff. So we had to look at, like, well, what are you really into? Then even with the whole Naval Academy thing at the time, I've been asking myself, we're in war, man. Would you be okay with going to get in the plane? You can conceivably, possibly get shot down. And he didn't bat an eyelash and say, well, if I'm going to go out, that's an honorable way to go out. I'm like, this dude is crazy. But nevertheless, that's what he was interested in.
Right. And even, sensitive issues like race, skin complexion. Because remember, even those kind of topics were coming up. Like, my skin is dark versus your skin, or black and white, my texture of hair versus your hair. Those were all kind of things that we needed to study and have conversations about, like, what are things that make you feel intimidated or feel like you're less than? What are those kind of things that anger you, or you feel like it's not fair, or you don't want to be a part of things, or you want to be a part of things? Like, you really have to enter into your child's world.
And the bottom line is, we talk about walking worthy of the calling for which you've been called. That stuff is important, because if you're going to go into certain environments, and then you're going to sometimes you're going to be the minority, right? And now you have to learn how to deal with being the only minority in that particular environment, and understand that there may be disparate treatment when you go to certain places, and even dealing with things that don't seem to be fair. You got, but based on where you're going, you may have to learn how to deal with that. Where some other people may not have to deal with that.
And those are all the kind of conversations that we had to have, and we needed to learn to listen. So that goes into the discipling piece.
But hold up, even before you do that, let's talk about Josh for a little bit, because like with him, he's into like the acting, and he's exposed us to a lot of different things. But even now, even as a college student, sometimes even working with projects, he's like, look, some of these people are real biological parts, holes. You know what I mean? They're not very nice people, but backside holes, right? But nevertheless, it's like, okay, but if you're interested in entertainment, you're going to work with a lot of people who are not nice. But so now, working, walking worthy of the calling for which you've been called. If you eventually want to do certain things in that area, people aren't going to be nice and sweet and Christian and praise the Lord. You're going to be dealing with some difficult people. So this is really just preparing you for the kind of people that you're going to work with. So they need to know how to work with them and still collaborate with them and produce a good project.
Right.
So, I mean, everything is really about preparation for where you're going, because it'd be very easy to have conversations about, people are a trip and forget them and not even bother with them. But that's not what it's about. It's about where are you going. But when you understand that, then you can have the appropriate conversations about walking worthy according to your call for what you've been called.
And of course, when you're studying your children, that is intentional. You have to make a decision to do that. You have to be willing to care about things that they consider problems or challenges. I know as an adult, you have much bigger issues on your plate, as you're trying to provide for your family. But when little Johnny or Sarah comes home and tell you that Mary
or Saquon or Raekwon,
right, won't play with you, or they're leaving you out. Okay.
Some brother
and
names.
Whatever the issues are at school or on the playground or at the lunch table, in the cafeteria, not only do you should you want to know about that, but you should care about it. Like, it shouldn't be something that you're just listening to so they can get finished so you can go do what else. You need to enter into their world. And that's what the studying piece is all about.
And that's also very important. I think we may touch on it a little more in a couple of minutes as well, but that's important because as they're telling you about that stuff, what they're giving you some insight into is how they handle conflict. And you can actually help mold them and shape them on how they handle conflict. Either they're going to handle it well or they're not. So, but that's a great opportunity for you to say, okay, let me evaluate my kid and see how they deal with situations. Now they're bringing it to you now, but there may become a point in time where they don't bring it to you. Then they're going to still have to deal with it. So you can you can really put your thumbprint on them right there, then and there in that situation. That can actually help them and give them some wise counsel in that area.
Right, and you really. When it comes to studying your children, and we're talking about identity, learning the identity of your child, this is discovery. Like, I don't just decide, Tony doesn't get to just decide what we want to be. We are created in the image of God. When he sent us here, there is a purpose and a plan that he has for each one of us. What we are supposed to be doing in partnership with him is really discovering who we are, who he has made us to be. What are our natural proclivities? What are the things that we love to do that it doesn't take much for us to do that? What are what are the things we love to talk about? And those are the things that we need to sharpen and to really explore, because those things in themselves may not be it. That may be the doorway to the next thing.
Yeah, because season, and you have to understand seasons and timing as well.
Right, and you have to understand even specificity of it. You may be first looking at it from a general perspective, like, yes, I like sports. Okay, but so now what sport? You like to be physical, but you thought it was soccer and it wasn't soccer. You thought it was basketball and it wasn't. So in the exploration.
So look, it could be something like football as well, but depending on your physical attributes, you can love the sport, but you have to let that person know, look, you're not going to the pros. Because if you're 5 foot, you can be the heavier kid, but if you're 5'11", 245 pounds, and you're an offensive lineman, you have the athletic skills of an offensive lineman, you're not going to make it to the NFL.
Right.
If you're 5'11", 245, you better be a linebacker. And even then, you're considered small because you're too short. They want you to be like 6'1", 6'2".
So it may be sports, but not the sport you think.
Not the sport you think. But even with that being said, you can still learn some things and extract some benefits of participating in that sport, and some of the things that you can learn from there from a team perspective and all that kind of stuff that can really help you in other areas of your life. But that's where the coaching and the discipling comes in,
right? Where
you can actually help steer them in a lot of different directions.
So can we move on to discipling?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead.
So the other aspect of learning the identity of your children is the discipling. And the discipling is the spiritual aspect of really helping your children to understand who God is, who Jesus is, why we serve Jesus, what he did for us, how to communicate with him, the importance of prayer, how to pray, teaching your children to pray. And I think Tony mentioned it earlier on, that's why we have the prayers in the book. So for those parents who struggle with praying, even as you're learning to pray, you need to teach your children how to pray, because they have to believe that their prayers can work just like the next person's prayers, that it doesn't have to be a big person's praying. If they're a little child, it doesn't have to be the adult that prays all the time, that they too, God listens to them. And these are all the little nuanced things that we have to take the time to spend teaching our children what to do and how to be as ambassadors of Christ, how it is that we're going to interact with other people, how it is that we treat people, the importance of appreciation and showing gratitude, and what is fair and what is unjust. Like, how do all these things line up with what's in the Bible, and understanding Bible accounts, as Tony would say. I'll say Bible stories, but how all of that works together, what it means to be thoughtful and to show appreciation for people. So all of these things go into how it is that we disciple our children. We are responsible for that. In fact, this is probably one of the biggest responsibilities that we will ever have as a parent, and it's really helping our children to identify who they are and what it is that they want to do, or where they will go when it pertains to their lives. Are you paying attention?
Yeah. So go ahead.
Go ahead and what?
Okay. So, and with all that being said, what I want you to do is to, even as you're discipling your children, make sure that you're encouraging them, and always looking to give them positive feedback, because if you're in the disciple.
I wasn't done. You moved on.
Okay, go ahead then. Go ahead.
Okay. So some other things that you want to pay attention to is how it is that you allow your children to express themselves. So the opinions of your children are important. Teaching them how to speak up is really important. Personality is developed around this time, especially when your children are in elementary school age. And we talked about this earlier. Tony and I were talking about this earlier. When you don't give your children voice, because a lot of us were raised to be seen and not heard. Well, that doesn't work today. And it doesn't work when you're trying to prepare your child to go out into the workforce. They have to be able to speak up for themselves. And so you start that kind of work when they're young. Well, why is that important where identity is concerned? Because if they want something, they have to be able to express themselves. If they want to establish something or go somewhere, it's just like with Jay and Josh, especially. I love Josh's story. with just going places by himself. Encouraging him, going into encouraging.
No, but not just places. I mean, he was like, I'm going to Dubai. Hey, Dad, I'm going to go to Guatemala. I mean,
but where did it start?
Yeah,
with,
but it's not just places. When you say going places, I mean, people don't understand the magnitude of him going.
Well,
he goes places.
Yeah, well, I was going to start with the first place that he went. You know, it starts with the crossing of the street, and then it's the riding of the bike, and then it's the catching of the train, which seems like a really big deal, which is what I was going to talk about, just his taking the train to American University. But to teach them that it's okay to be limitless in what it is that you desire to do. And that comes with them understanding who they are as it relates to Christ and how he has strengthened us to be all that we can be. And even with our own fears, that we don't project those on our children and inhibit them from exploring and being willing to go to Dubai and all the other places that he's been.
Yes.
London and Spain and
like I said, he just called me and said, Dad, I'm going to Guatemala.
Australia.
But I'm just going to go to Guatemala in July. The plane ticket costs this much. I'm going to go. Okay.
So then we have to encourage them.
Absolutely, and we have to really just pay attention to their uniqueness as well. I think that's very important. In addition to encouraging them, and paying attention to their uniqueness and understanding that their bent is their bent, right? And we got to really encourage them to do it that way, and always listen to them, because you got to make sure that you listen to them, because their voice is important. Because if you create an environment where you're always telling them what to do and never listening to their voice, and we don't realize it, but what we're telling them is that, you know what, your voice isn't important. So then we wonder why, when they become adults or even as teenagers, we want them to step up and do certain things. But if they were in environments where their voice was never important, they don't realize that I should step up. And sometimes we the parents have created that environment or that mindset within them, because we just tune them out and then really give them their voice the magnification that it needed at the particular point in time. And then, of course, they become adults. We want them to be assertive. We want them to step up and do certain things, but they've never really been encouraged to do so. So we really have to, and that's in part of the encouraging as well, and really encourage them to not put any limits on themselves and always be expressive and to try new things. And you gave a great example. What was it about trying new things?
Jay with the soccer.
Yeah, Jay with the soccer. I mean, just, hey, try it, give it a shot. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But nevertheless, always be willing to try something new.
Right. And so what that was about is we're not a soccer family. Like, I didn't grow up playing soccer. Tony didn't grow up playing soccer. Baseball. Yeah. And I mean, I was cheerleading and track and marching band and that kind of stuff as a younger person, and then volleyball, basketball, but soccer was not a part of it. So when he brought that home, we were like, oh,
go for it, man.
Okay, soccer.
Go for it.
And that, first of all, it being his idea, us going along with it, and then him going with something that was unknown and unfamiliar, that just opened the door for him to do that on other levels and with other things. And that's what these kinds of opportunities and this kind of exposure does. So with encouragement, you always want to be the cheerleader for your children. You always want to give them hugs, pats on the backs, affirming words for whatever it is, even if it's something you don't understand, something that's unfamiliar to you, that you are open and willing, even if you have some level of concern. It's okay to discuss the concern, but don't let the concern paralyze you or be used to paralyze your child from then trying different things and going different places. And I mean, I can't express enough how important it is as you're working to help your child identify who they are, why you need to do that.
Yeah, and really just keeping all that in the context of walking worthy the calling for which you've been called. And that particular example is soccer is really immaterial. It's the fact that just being open to trying new things and going for it, because that's something that's going to be very beneficial to your children as they're growing up and they have to explore new things.
And even if they fail at it, that's even a part of life. That should be okay. They don't always have to be at the top, in the front. The fact that they were willing to go for it, that should be commended and celebrated.
And that also goes for you, because I mean, we know, if we're going to be honest about it, a lot of adults have just stopped going for it, and we become so regimented by life, and we're afraid to make mistakes, so therefore we just stay stagnant. And even, I would say, even to the adults, you need to go for it, walk worthy for the calling for which you've been called, figure out, really discern and discover what you've been called to do and really go for it, because it's quite possible that what you're doing now may not be all that you've been called to do. You may be called to some greater heights and some do some more amazing things, but you're not going to do them if you just sit around and not go for it. So that same principle that applies to your child as you're trying to govern them and help grow them up, it also applies to you as well. You parent, or even you grandparent or great grandparent, whoever you may be. Even with the great grandparent, there may still be some things that you can do other than just say, I'm here for the kids.
So what was that point you wanted to make about, well, you talked about the uniqueness earlier on, about each child being unique, but to add to that you don't try to use the same methods for both children.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You have got to look at them individually. That's the same way God does us. We are all unique, fashioned in his image, but with different gifts and talents. And so whatever is for one child will not necessarily work. You used the word inappropriate earlier. Whatever you're doing with one would be inappropriate for another. But it's also because of what their interests are, and being okay with them being different. And not everybody doesn't want to play basketball. Everybody doesn't want to be an artist. Everybody doesn't want to sing.
Everybody wants to sing.
Somebody wants to be
you just don't want to do it well, but everybody wants
scientist, or somebody wants to play with bugs, and that needs to be okay. Because what if they like bugs and wanted to do things with bugs? I'd have had to be okay with it.
But anyway, let's talk about some practical things that we can do as we're wrapping this up. Some things we can do to actually help.
Well, these
parents.
Are questions.
Yeah, some questions you can ask. Go ahead, you want to?
Well, yeah, and so as we give you some of these questions to think about, it's not only for your children, it's also to help you, because as you're working with your children, as we stated earlier, you are also discovering who you are. So one particular question you can ask yourself or ask your children is, how would you describe yourself? Like, what words would you use? And that's really fun to do as the children are younger.
And that's really an open-ended question as well, because it's really vague, right? So then you should be able to get a wide variety of answers there. But really, just take it in. There's no right or wrong whatever answers you get, but just really take it in and use it as from an observatory, from the perspective of just really observing and getting some insight. But even ask yourself, like, how would you describe yourself? Even as an adult, I think that may be a little more challenging for an adult, because you may try to be a little more careful with the answers. But just be honest with yourself. And I would even say make a positive column and a negative column and see where you may fit, because sometimes some people may be too negative. I'm just going to throw that out. They may be too negative, and just see, just write it, just jot it down, and then maybe eventually put them in the positive and negative.
That's good. So that you're forced to think about it from both perspectives.
From both perspectives. And so how would you think about yourself? And of course, the most famous question, we've all heard it before, but I think it's one of the best questions ever posed is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Or what would you do if you knew it was impossible to fail? Or another way to put it, like, what would you do with yourself if you had $50 million in your investment account? What would you do differently today that you're not doing right now? And then the subsequent question really becomes then, well, why aren't you doing that now? Or how would you feel, or how would you behave if you had $50 million in your investment account? Then of course, well, why aren't you acting that way now? Because you can have it. Why are you letting the lack thereof dictate how you feel and behave?
And one of the questions that I thought of, especially thinking about asking children, is, what would you do with your life if you knew everybody would be happy for you for doing that? Because a lot of times you make choices based on what you think people are going to say about that choice, whether or not they're going to agree with you. So if you were making a choice and everybody was going to be happy with it, what would that choice be to do with your life?
Yeah, and a follow-up question to that is, I think this is a very good one. This is one that you talked about, is what kind of person would you really like to be? And then of course you got to ask yourself, well, am I that kind of person? Can I be better at it? If I could be better, what am I going to do to get better at it? Those are follow-up questions to that. But the fundamental question is, what kind of person would I really like to be? And then if I'm not that person, then why aren't I that person? Do I have any fears? What's hindering me from becoming that kind of person? So I think, but that's a really good one. But especially for your child, what kind of person would you like to be? And then, just listen for the answers and see what they say. And then and that's one of the things that you can really use to encourage them, because they give you some insight into what's the desires of their heart. And then you can encourage them in that direction.
And what kind of people would you like to help? Like if you could help anybody. And these are really good questions as the children grow. Like this isn't a one time. These are exploratory questions that you can ask all the time as they're growing, because you'll see them changing. When they're really young, they have no inhibitions. They'll laugh out loud. They'll roll in the floor. They'll do silly things. But, as they get older, then the boys become cool and the girls become shy. And, then they stop being free spirit people.
You mean the fast girls become shy?
They're not fast in elementary. They're not.
I knew some fast girls in elementary.
Okay, but anyway, they don't start off fast. So as you see them becoming fast, you can ask these questions and help to pull them back in. So another question would be, what things or people do you really care about?
And I think that's a very important question, because, and I think it's really important. I think that's even more important for the adults at this stage of the game, because it'll help you define where you're going. But it's really important for the kids, because sometimes the kids don't have enough knowledge to know what kind of things they care about. They may know what kind of people they care about, but the actual things or the issues that matter to them, that may still be forming. But even with that being said, they know enough, fortunately and unfortunately, to give you some kind of insight into how their brains are working and what's really having an impact on them and how they're processing information. Yeah, so that's good. But the things that they may care about, and the question that you're going to ask for that is based on those facts. What makes you happy, right? And then of course the converse is what makes you sad,
right?
Because that'll give you some insight to them as well.
Right.
What makes you afraid of? Is there anything that you are really afraid of? It could be like a certain event. It could be something that they may foresee happening. A kid could overhear the parents talking about finances and think they may be afraid of being homeless or something. Who knows? Or some kid may be afraid of boogeyman, or some kids may be afraid of the thugs down the street. Who knows? Right. It could be a lot of fear. And then of course, you have some kids, the biggest fear they may have is that they may not get into Harvard. Who knows? But people have fears, and nevertheless, we shouldn't even though I kind of chuckled at that, but we shouldn't necessarily minimize anybody's fears, because somebody could be distraught if they don't get the school that they desire. So
that's right.
And to give us some insight into their makeup as well.
And that also goes with if they were never allowed to fail. And how was that dealt with when they did fail? Because if they're that distraught, then that was a buildup. Like they live their lives thinking they need to be perfect or everything has to always go right. And that's not even reality.
I'll just use this as an example. I mean, we're not making up anything. I mean, you can look it up in, I think it was in Time magazine, one of those schools, but you can look up the schools that they have a lot of suicides. And I remember when we visited Cornell, and they were talking about a lot of suicides on the campus and the kids jumping into the gorges and all that kind of good stuff. And then when we visited the school, we talked to the girl who was giving us the tour. And she said, there was a lot of students, primarily a lot of engineering students, because they were getting grades much lower than they would traditionally got in high school. But because of the curve, they would pass. But in their mind, they knew I didn't do as well as I should have. And then they would just go jump in the gorge. And of course, by the time we visited, some of the gorges had fences around them to prevent suicides, which took away from the beautiful view. Still a beautiful view, but nevertheless, these were kids who weren't allowed to fail. So therefore, they didn't know how to properly assess, hey, I didn't get a 100 on this exam. I may have gotten a 72, which based on the curve could be like a B plus, right? Or I got a 65, and in my mind, that's failing. But the class average may have only been 75. And it's like, hey, it's hard work, but they couldn't handle those perceived failures. And so.
And where does that pressure come from?
Where does the pressure come from? And you have to look at it in your children, so and really help them put things in proper perspective. As we talked about earlier, just how to properly assess things, and that's one of the things you do as you're observing them and discipling them and studying them. Right.
So the other area that is important to look at are their personalities, and really figuring out what kind of person are they, and that goes into whether or not they are really shy, or is it just that they're reserved? Are they extroverts? Paying attention to how it is that they like to interact, or how it is that they like to talk with people. How do they act when they're around strangers? Those are the things that you can help to develop, so that based on what it is that they want to do, that they're prepared from a personality perspective. If you want to work with people, but you don't like to share, or you want to be the center of attention, it's going to be very hard to be in some environments where it's a team where it requires a team effort.
You're going to struggle.
If you don't know how,
it's going to be a struggle
to let other people speak. So if you notice that that's how your child is, you have to work on those things. And we have to be willing to give constructive criticism and feedback for their development. So everything they do is not right. Everything they do is not perfect. Everything they create is not beautiful. And as they get older, you have to take the time to say, oh, that's a really lovely picture. Why would you draw this over here away? Why did you put the nose over here instead of on the actual face? And have that conversation. And do you see many people walking around without their faces, their noses on their faces? You need to put the nose on the face. I'm using that being funny, but those are like boundaries and understanding guidelines and figuring out how things fit together and what works right and what doesn't. Those are the kind of conversations that say, oh, that's so beautiful. Yes, that's beautiful. Okay. And just letting the child do that.
Yeah, that's mommy stuff. I don't understand. I don't have anything to contribute.
Well, that's okay, because I was the one dealing with that kind of stuff, where the faces were green, and there are no green people.
Shrek.
So he's not a people
person. But anyway, go ahead.
So those are the other kind of things you really want to be paying attention to. How it is. What are they afraid of? Like what are the things that they just will not go towards? Because fear is a big one. And fear is normally of things you're unfamiliar with. So you really want to explore what those things are and help them to break through those things. And as our kids were growing up, those were things that we also had to deal with as far as joining certain organizations, being a part of different groups, whether or not they felt like they could or should, talking through those things and helping them to see that you can have, you can be, you can do whatever you desire. Like there are no limitations. Don't create limitations for yourself. And then you'll see how far you actually can go. In fact, there will be more options to you if you stay open. And those are the kind of things that you want to work with your children as you help them identify who they are.
Amen. So with that being said, I want to wrap. Are we done?
Sure.
Yeah, let's be done. So, because we're way past the time. So as we discussed, we talked from our book, Parenting Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It. We also have several other books. We have them on tape. Okay, good. Mm-hmm. We have Leadership Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It. It's a 31-day guide of becoming an effective leader from the inside out. I think this is probably our most important work because it's going to help you with the parenting and also with this book as well. Marriage Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It. It's a 31-day guide to putting the fun, focus back into your marriage. And I think all three of those are important: the fun, the fire, and the focus. Mm-hmm. I think they're all equally important. All of those books can be purchased on Amazon.com. You can get them by typing in the titles that I just articulated, or you can put in our names in the search box, Tony and Nicole Davis, and those books will pop up and you can purchase them there. You can also purchase them from our website, empoweredtoengage.com. Mm-hmm. And if you purchase it from empoweredtoengage.com, we will sign it as it gets shipped out to you.
And so next month, so this concludes our month on parenting. And next month, we will begin our conversation around Speak to the Mountains. And we will actually be interviewing people about this book. This is an anthology, which means there are co-authors, over 30 different co-authors. Now, we won't get a chance to speak to all 30, but we do have some, we'll have a guest author every week to talk about their part in this book and anything else that we find of interest that we want to talk about or ask questions around when we get together. So we hope you join us during that time. And other than that, I think we're done.
Good night.
Good night.